Eh,
Feel a bit lonely here.
it's terrible. We need to get you some friends up on the stage, Carlos.
If someone wants to come.
Thanks everyone for joining. I promise we're not going to make this a boring political session, although I'm sure as European Commissioner, Carlos has a lot of statistics and arguments that he'll be able to get across in the next few minutes. But Carlos, I think I speak for all of us here that what we really want to know is the EU building a bunch of flying cars in a secret facility, and when is ours going to be ready to ship?
First, I think that the flying cars, like the inventor of Twitter said, I mean, we dreamed about like for 100 years of flying cars, and we got 140 characters. I think that we are actually looking and working with flying cars. By the way, there's a fantastic project in Slovakia about flying cars, and so we're working on that. But we're doing things that I think are much more important than flying cars. You know, we just had a project that for me was really mind-blowing. It's with the 3D printing. Basically, you can 3D print a house for 35 euros. Imagine what that means for a continent like Africa, that you could 3D print houses for 35
like
euros.
Like a temporary shelter or like a real house that you're going to live in and build a family
in? A real thing. So you kind of 3D print with concrete, and you build something for a very cheap price. Yep. And that, I mean, that changes lives more than any kind of flying cars. Or when I arrived in 2014, and you remember that, Ryan, we had the big Ebola crisis, and we were the first to actually do a vaccine for Ebola at the European Union, with the European Union money, with the taxpayers' money. And I think that sometimes I feel that people don't know about all these things that we do that change the life of people. And I think that we should be more vocal about it. That's absolutely true.
Tech/ICT more generally, that's the biggest chunk of the EU money that goes towards research, isn't it? Like, give us a sense of how many billions go towards it. Does it just go to big companies? Are you trying to get startups involved in the money now as well? How is it structured?
So first, I mean, we have the biggest in the world in terms of a pure science program at the level of the EU. It's 80 billion, and basically it's 10, 11 billion per year that we invest in science. But the thing is that it's actually quite small compared to other parts of the world. To give you an idea, we invest globally less 150 billion than the US. And so that is a problem, and we have to change that. And so we look at the problem being that we don't invest enough. So even if it looks big, it's not enough for everything that we want to do. And that's one of the problems that we have to tackle, is that today the political leaders in Europe, they're not talking about science, they're not talking about innovation. And that there's a disconnect in between the people and the political leaders, and we have to get that back on track. You know, last year when we actually were together in Davos, Ryan, there was this speech from the president of China, Xi Jinping, and he said, you know, I mean, we are tired of the old policies, the old monetary policies didn't work, the fiscal policies didn't work, shouldn't we invest in new innovation and science policies? And you don't see that at the European level as you see it from a president like the president of China.
But there's some structural problems there, isn't there? So like if we think about China, President Xi, I mean, he's practically the king now, as Donald Trump said. You know, he can do a 30-year plan. He can just make it happen because he doesn't have democracy to worry about. And then in the US, they have the massive military and defense contractor complex that is the base for so much of the fundamental tech research that's gone on to help Silicon Valley build. If we don't have a dictatorship or a massive military to get us going here, what else can we do to get that ball rolling in Europe?
I think that we have democracy that is much more beautiful than all of that, and I think that we have to cherish that democracy and see that the biggest asset that we have in Europe that other parts of the world don't have is exactly based on diversity, and that we have 28 countries with 23 languages, with scientists that think in a different way and that invent things that others can't. And I think that we really have to invest more on that. But to your question in terms of the investment, if you look at what we invest at the European level, it's very little. Like we invest basically 8%, less than 10% of everything that is invested in science. So we do a lot at the national level. But you know what? At the national level, what can you do? Because today, you cannot be a champion. You have to collaborate. You have to work with others around the world. And so you look at the US, and in the US, 50% of the investment is at the federal level.
Yeah.
So we invest 10 billion a year for whole science at the EU level. In health, just Francis Collins at the National Institute of Health invests 30 billion a year. And what that makes is scale, because today for science you need scale.
Yeah.
You know, I always remember an amazing guy I met really at the beginning. He's one of really one of my idols. He's an astronaut from Italy, Luca Parmitano. And Luca Parmitano, he was telling me, look, you have to invest more at the level of the EU. And I said, but tell me your arguments as a scientist. And he said, oh, you're an engineer. You know what's a tetrahedron? And the tetrahedron basically is like 4 triangles that look like a pyramid, but like with a triangle on the base. And he said, you know, Carlos, you know how you can get the vertex to go higher, like to have better science, like to get the top going higher? There's just one option, is to increase the base, is to enlarge the base. Yeah. And the base, when you have 500 million, we should put much more money at the European level, because at the European level, you are really investing on excellence.
Yeah. So here's the 80 billion euro question for you. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. It sounds like a great plan. And now Britain are running away and Brexiting. So they're going to blow a big hole in the EU budget. So who are you competing against? I can't imagine anyone would sort of intellectually say, oh, well, that's a really bad idea if we invested more in research. Yep. But you've got a bunch of farmers who want the money. Britain's running off with 10 billion a year. So are we going to have to turn to leveraged financial products to grow all of this research funding base? Or have you got some other magic formula that's going to sort of elbow out the others and get cash in the next long-term EU budget?
So several questions in your question. The first on the way I feel is sad about the fact that the UK is leaving. And somehow, as a lot of people like me, there's some part of myself that thinks that this is not possible. But I think that we have to face reality and we have to solve that. And there's a first part, which is to solve the divorce bill. And how do you solve that at the European level? They owe us money, they have to pay, we have people there, they have people here. And so let's just for a moment say that we will deal with that. And I hope we will, and everybody wants to solve that. Then we have to think of a future relationship with them. And I really hope from the deep of myself that that relationship includes science.
Well, actually, that's what they're most keen on in a way. They don't like some of the more political stuff, what they would consider red tape, but the actual university-to-university links, for example, they're really popular, the student exchange programs. Yeah. So you're in with a shot of keeping some of that British money. And you know, Ryan,
when we met 2.5 years ago, 3 years, at the time, we had this vision of like creating an idea like that to connect with people. And I at the time, I thought, why don't say that our vision is about open innovation, open science, and openness to the world, meaning that the European area of science is much bigger than Europe. Right? I mean, we have Switzerland, we have Israel, we have Ukraine, we have Tunisia, we have other people, because we want to have a program that really is open to everybody, to get the best of the best from everywhere. And I think that's to your question. So we want to keep that openness. And I will fight as much as I can at an individual level, but also as a political level, to keep that going ahead. But your question about what's missing, I mean, so we have Brexit and we have to deal with that, and I hope we will. And I hope we'll find a solution to have a relationship with the UK. But then there's the fact that, you know, you look at venture capital. We were looking at all these venture capitalists here and looking at Europe. I mean, 2 years ago in the US, they raised 25 billion in venture capital. In Europe, do you know how much that was? 5 billion. Yeah. raised in venture capital. So we have a problem. We have a problem that the US is raising 5 times more than the EU in terms of venture capital. So we have to try to attract money, private money.
So, in fact, is it possible then that the biggest key to your success or to more public investment in tech research in Europe, it's not actually how you structure your own program necessarily, but it's finishing off a capital markets union and making sure people move away from a bank-only finance system in Europe?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the really difficult thing is that Europe is totally dependent on banks. So 80% of the financing of our companies in Europe is bank loans. And that cannot be. In the US, it's 20% bank loans, and the rest is venture capital and other sources of financing. So that is the major part of the work, is how do you actually complete that capital markets union? And we have to do it. Then we have to put money on the line. So I'm putting 400 million of public money for a fund of funds for Europe. And the idea is that I'm going to do it if someone comes and says that can multiply those 400 million at least by 4. So if someone comes and says, give me that and I'll go to the private sector and I'll get you almost up to 2 billion, I say, okay, you can manage that money.
Okay.
But you cannot
Carlos
manage that money.
is going to be waiting backstage for anyone who wants to put their hand up for that 400 million.
Absolutely. We have open to everyone in the world actually to help us on that in terms of general partners of venture capital. And that will, imagine if we just had raised like 5 billion, if we can put 2 billion on the line, that will have an impact of investing in so many companies, we can have much more venture capital. Because today, the problem is scale. You are a European company, you have a great idea, and we have so many of those that then they need 10 million. Okay, you'll find the 10 million in the Web Summit and all these venture capitalists. But if you need 50 or 60 million, you can find it and you have to go to the US. And so this fund of funds that we are creating is exactly for that, to have and give the opportunity of people to dream, to build, to keep, to scale up, and to stay in Europe. I think that's the only thing we can do. It's probably a drop in the ocean, but it's a big drop, so we're happy with that.
Well, you have my vote for that. One other question that I imagine a lot of other people here in the audience would have. It's a very, it's not only startups here at Web Summit, but there are a lot of startups. There are people wanting to get into this game, so they're not just running big companies. But the EU has a reputation for complicated paperwork, for example. If you're a startup, you've got a lot more things on your mind than hiring lobbyists in Brussels or wasting 20% of your time figuring out how to get some of that cash if there are simpler ways to get it. So what are you doing, or what can you do to simplify the way EU research funding is granted so that smaller companies feel like they can join a consortium or can maybe approach you on their own, and they have some chance of seeing cash at the end of the day?
So we don't want to reinvent the wheel, and there's something we do very well. I mean, we do much better than everyone in the world, which is to invest in fundamental science. And why is it? Because we invest in fundamental science based on excellence, and we don't ask questions. So we give 3 million euros to the best scientists, and we don't ask questions. They just come with the ideas, they do it, and they know better than we do. I mean, as a politician, am I able to choose like a project in science? No. And I don't want to, and scientists know better than I do. So in innovation, we have to exactly do the same thing. And so we created this concept, the European Innovation Council, that is exactly about that, to open the doors and don't ask questions. Instead of telling people, oh, should you invent the new battery or go to the next flying car, I don't want to ask those questions. I want people to come with ideas, and if the ideas are good, and more, if the innovator is good, because I think sometimes more the idea is the person, then I will invest in that person. And that concept is called the European Innovation Council because we'll be kind of a one-stop shop for everyone. And we're going to put almost 3 billion euros until 2020 on this idea that is kind of revolutionary, as you know, in the European Commission, because everybody wants to have their own turf and their own kind of business, and I want to just to break those things and say it and create. So we were very excited about it, and I've been talking with a lot of entrepreneurs. They like the idea. It's also a branding. I mean, we have a lot of entrepreneurs here that tell me, when I go to a venture capitalist, if I have funding from the EU, it's a seal of excellence. People know about it, and we're proud of it.
Now, one question, it's not off topic, but in fact, it's very on point. There are a lot of discussions in society generally at the moment. There are a couple of panels here about the lack of diversity in tech. Seeing as we're asking about the benefits of public versus private money, I would theorize that one of the benefits of public money is that it can be a bit more open-minded and structured about how to have an inclusive tech sector, an inclusive tech community, not just a bunch of rich white guys giving more money to rich white guys. Do you agree with that theory? What are you doing to get more girls and women involved in all of this?
You know, I was very lucky because when I was very young, I went to the US and I studied there, and I had really a person that somehow was a mentor. Is a woman, the first African-American woman that had tenure at the Harvard Business School, called Linda Hill. And she was an inspiration because she was studying actually diversity for more than 20 years. And all the studies that you do are very simple. I mean, diversity creates innovation and creates science in a way that you cannot have in a non-diverse group. The thing is that you kind of won't have people around you that are like you. And so it's easier to start working with people like you. But then the results don't happen the same way that they happen in a diverse group. And so one of the things that from those studies of Linda Hill came out is that, one, scientists that are in groups that are diverse, meaning diverse in geography, in religion, in types of people, in beliefs, produce 20% more and have more citations.
Yep.
And boards of directors of companies where you have diversity of women, of credos, of tolerance, you know, it always works better.
But if you want to do something amazing, you've got to get out of your comfort zone, basically.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And so I think that in Europe, guess what? I mean, we don't have a lot. I mean, we don't have to receive any kind of lessons from other parts of the world because we have great examples where it works. We have the Nordic countries that from very early on made it work, and we just have to replicate that. And like on my advisory panels in the EU, we have a rule of at least 40% to 50% women, so minimum 40%. And the other day there was this French scientist, a great French scientist, a woman, that came to me and said, look, I felt so well because normally I go to these meetings where just men, and I'm there like with one or two women, and here, like the fact that we were half of the room, the meeting was so much better. And I said, look, great. So it means that we're doing the right thing.
That is great. We have used up 100% of our time, so we're at risk of mansplaining now, but I really appreciated that you took the time to answer that question. Give a round of applause to Carlos Moedas, the European Commissioner for Research and Innovation.